you can say what you like about David Price as a fighter. And I've been a David Price skeptic from day one, from when he was an amateur. But as a boxing analyst, I rate him very highly. This guy has a very, very good mind for boxing, for analyzing fights and predicting fights. And I've actually never seen him get a prediction wrong. And he's made quite a lot of predictions over the last few years. This guy is very good at analyzing boxing. If you ain't seen him, I suggest you look out for him next time he's working on Sky or Box Nation or whatever. He's got a very, very good eye and a very good understanding of the sport. Now, some people might say, well, David Price makes a bunch of mistakes, so he can't have that much boxing knowledge. Well, the best boxers aren't necessarily always the best boxing analysts, and vice versa. Sometimes the best boxing analysts ain't the best boxers. Okay? You got guys who, like, for example, coaches. A lot of the greatest coaches of all time were not great boxers themselves. And it's the same in other sports. In football, the greatest football coaches were not necessarily great football players themselves. So I don't think that David Price's deficiencies as a fighter detract at all from his ability to analyze the sport and his understanding of the sport. So I rate David Price very highly as a boxing analyst. And as I say, I've never seen him get a prediction wrong. So he's made a few predictions in an interview. I believe it was on Seconds Out. Channel. But if I'm wrong, either way, the link is in the description below so you can go listen to the interview for yourselves. And he says a bunch of interesting things in this interview, but he makes a few predictions. First off, he predicts Mayweather Maidana. And he says that Mayweather Maidana is going to be a lot tougher for Floyd than people expect. He thinks that Maidana with his awkward rough style is going to make it difficult for Floyd, but he expects Floyd to win a decision. But he sees it being similar to the Miguel Cotto fight, as in Floyd winning clearly, but a rough fight. Then he predicted Froch Groves. And another thing I like about David Price is he don't feel no way, from what I've seen. He don't feel any way about predicting against someone who he might be friendly with. He doesn't usually sit on the fence, from what I've seen David Price. He normally picks an outright winner. And he says that he sees Froch Groves going similar to the first fight early on. Like the first few rounds, some heated exchanges with Groves getting the better of it. But then he says from the mid to late rounds, he sees George Groves getting on his bike and actually boxing on the back foot and moving around, which is something that a lot of people felt that George Groves should have done in the first fight. And had he done that, who knows? Maybe he would be champion right now instead of complaining about a premature stoppage. So it is what it is. But ultimately, David Price says he's picking George Groves to win the fight on points. Interesting pick. I'm wondering if George Groves' strategy might work better if it's the opposite. If he starts off boxing cagey and then maybe turns it on later on in the fight, because Carl Froch is known to be a very strong finisher in fights. So maybe he'll try and preserve energy early on and have plenty in the tank for later on in the fight. And when if Froch is behind on points, he might start getting desperate and Groves will be able to step in and tag in with big shots. But nonetheless, Price is predicting George Groves to win that fight on points. And then he predicted Tyson Fury against Derek Chisora. And again, David Price is apparently pretty good friends with Derek Chisora. They've sparred a lot. Even recently, Price and Chisora have been sparring. And as we know, he's a big rival of Tyson Fury. Him and Tyson Fury have had very few good things to say about each other. But David Price don't feel no way about picking Tyson Fury to win the fight. Even though he's friends with Chisora and he's not friends with Fury, he's still picking Tyson Fury to win the fight. He thinks Fury's going to win on points. Despite the fact that Derek Chisora is in better shape now, he also believes Fury has improved a lot and he sees Tyson Fury taking that fight. So interesting picks. I'm going to keep an eye on those fights. Obviously, I'd make my own picks, but I'm going to keep an eye on those fights and remember who he picked to see if he can keep this 100% prediction record going. But he also said something very interesting. The interviewer asked him about how he sees a fight between Tyson Fury and Vladimir Klitschko going, whether that fight will happen and how he thinks Tyson Fury will do. And unlike a lot of, probably the majority of boxing fans out there, David Price actually believes that Tyson Fury will give Vladimir Klitschko a hell of a fight. And I agree with that. I think people are really underestimating Tyson Fury's boxing ability. And David Price says a guy like Tyson Fury, who's tall, actually taller than Vladimir, has longer arms than Vladimir. A guy like that who has relatively fast hands and knows how to use his reach. That's the kind of opponent who's going to give Vladimir the most problems. And that's the kind of opponent who's likely to beat Vladimir, or who has the best chance of beating Vladimir. I totally agree with that. This whole idea that there's a mystery of how to beat Vladimir, I don't know what the mystery is. We've seen Vladimir beaten a bunch of times by a few different styles, but the most comprehensive defeat that he suffered was against Corey Sanders, who was a tall fighter, whose reach was long enough to deal with Vladimir at long range, and he had fast hands. There's no mystery to it to me. I said from day one, any version of Vladimir Klitschko would be beaten by a prime Corey Sanders, because Vladimir didn't fight a prime Corey Sanders. He fought an old man who was out of shape, who just turned up for a payday. Sanders even admitted that to the Sky Sports team when he spoke to Ian Dark before the fight. He said, I'm just turning up for a payday, and, you know, if I lose, I lose. If I win, I win. I don't really care. It's just my last big payday, my last hurrah before I retire. He just turned up there for a payday. He was as shocked as anyone when he actually won the fight. Okay, so his style, that long-range boxing style where he has enough height and reach, he's like 6'4", 6'5". He had enough height and reach to actually compete with Vladimir at long range. Okay, and that southpaw style. Obviously, Tyson Fury's not a southpaw, but he's got much longer arms than either Klitschko or Corey Sanders. He himself has got fast hands. Maybe not as fast as Sanders, but he's certainly got fast hands for a big man, can put his punches together and fights very well at long range when he stays disciplined. So I think Tyson Fury will give him a hell of a fight. I agree with David Price on that one. And David Price, interestingly enough, said that's probably why Vladimir Klitschko don't fight tall fighters with fast hands, because he knows that those are the kind of guys who are going to give him the most problems, and he knows those are the kind of guys who have the best chance of beating him. That's probably why he don't fight them. And David Price is not a Klitschko hater. David Price has gone on record. Look it up on YouTube. He's gone on record as saying he looks up to Vladimir Klitschko. That Vladimir Klitschko to him is a role model. That he's almost like an idol for David Price. So this ain't a Klitschko hater coming out saying this. All right? People accuse me of being a Klitschko hater. Well, this ain't coming from me. This is coming from David Price, someone who looks up to Klitschko, someone who's a professional boxer himself, and he's basically saying that Vladimir cherry picks his opponents to suit him, to suit his style. It's what David Price is saying, not me. So I'd like to hear from the Klitschko people how you feel about that. You know, it is what it is. And personally, like I say, I agree with David Price. And people are going to throw a few names out there like Marius Wack. Marius Wack was not a guy, even though he's tall, like a little bit taller than Vladimir, he's not a guy who knows how to fight long. Marius Wack is a tall guy who is very slow, for one. Don't have the fast hands that David Price was talking about. Very slow, and he doesn't fight well at long range. He doesn't utilize his attributes. He actually fights more like a short guy. Almost like an Antonio Margarito, in the sense that Margarito was big and tall for a welterweight, but he never used his height and reach. He would always come down to the level of his opponent and fight in the trenches. So Wack is like that. He's not a guy who knows how to use his height and reach, and therefore Vladimir was able to control him. So, you know, that is what that is. Also, there was Tony Thompson, who did have good height and reach, but again, Thompson's slow. He don't have the kind of speed of a Deontay Wilder, which is another guy that David Price mentioned. He said Wilder, Fury, those kind of guys would give Vladimir problems because they're tall, actually taller than Vladimir. Both of them have longer arms and they're both fast. And those are the kind of guys, if Vladimir is going to lose, he's going to lose to one of those kind of guys, in David Price's opinion. And I certainly think those are the guys, the big tall guys, they're going to have the best chance against Vladimir. They're going to give him the most problems and give him the most competitive fights. And whether they beat him or not, I personally want to see him in the most competitive matches possible. And I can't understand why anyone else wouldn't. People would say, oh, he'd beat those guys. So? If that's what you feel, fine, that's your opinion. But you can't tell me that there's no point in fighting those guys. Of course there's a point. What's the point in him being called heavyweight champion if he's not going to fight the best available contenders? So it is what it is. Anyway, drop your comments below. Let me know how you feel about David Price's predictions, and let me know how you feel about his comments on Vladimir Klitschko. Again, this is not a guy who's a Klitschko hater. So drop your comments below. Let me know how you feel. This is Hatman. I'm out.